Hello, and welcome back to the Earn Your Badge from Home program. Today, y'all are going to be building a really fun game, actually using JavaScript, HTML, and a little bit of CSS, and also going to be continuing to review those topics that we talked about before with functions and variables. Just to review a little bit, functions are those essentially mini sets of instructions that you write in your code to implement in a bunch of different places. And it really saves you as a programmer a lot of time, and it also makes your code a lot more organized. Variables are something you are never going to stop using. They are just simply easy ways for us to store information, and they come in really, really handy. So building on top of that, we're going to keep learning about other awesome principles of computer science today. And I hope you guys enjoyed making this game, and feel free to totally share it with your friends and family and see if they can play it as well.
So let's take a look at the project you guys are going to be building today. So this is very similar to an adventure game, or if you've ever played the Oregon Trail game before. It's basically the user is going to be led through a series of decisions that they're going to have to make to ultimately win, or in this case, survive. So the scenario that we've created is that we are lost in the woods and have to make the right decisions to try to get out. And we've just inserted a picture of the forest, and then I'm going to click on start. And immediately my first prompt comes up. So let's read it. So it says, you are dehydrated, there's a river nearby. Do you drink the water straight from the river, or do you take the time to build a fire and use a pot you have to boil it? Type drink or boil for your answer. So depending on what the user types in, we're going to be led through a series of different pathways and decisions that they're going to have to take. And so a big thing with this is we have to make sure that whatever we type here in this prompt box matches exactly whatever that they've asked for. So if this is in all caps, then my word drink here also has to be in all caps. So I'm going to hit OK to submit my answer. And here it gives me an alert, and it says you contracted disease from the contaminated water. Better luck next time. All right, so let me run that one more time and see what would happen if I wrote the other answer instead. So I'm going to type in boil this time. I'm going to hit OK. And here I am led to another prompt. So essentially that meant that that was the correct answer. So we are going to build this out today. We're going to figure out how to insert that picture into this box here on the side, as well as get all of these alerts and prompts popping up. So we are going to use a decision tree to plan out this game, because obviously things can get a little bit complicated because there's so many different pathways that the user can take. So their first decision is going to be whether they have to drink or boil the water. Okay. And depending on whether and let's say that drinking it straight from the river is the bad choice. So let's say, okay, here the consequence is they exit the game and they die. So we're just going to say exit. And then here, when they boil it, they have the choice to continue moving forward. So let's say that we'll come up with the two options in just a second. What you can do if you want to is make either of these decisions have their own set of consequences. For today, we're just going to leave it as there's one right and one wrong, and the wrong one's just going to immediately boot them out of the game. But if you want to, feel free to have drink be its own set of new choices. This is just so you guys kind of get a chance to work with conditionals in a new way that doesn't seem like super overly complicated. So with boiling the water, let's say, or you were able to hydrate yourself. Let's do the next one as the user is trying to get to food. So let's give them the option of, okay, they can either eat bugs from a log, or they can try to hunt a snake. So that's what their two options are going to be. So let's say bugs or hunt a snake. And then let's say that the snake attacks them and it turns out to be venomous, and that is where their exit point is. So snake will be considered wrong. So this will be the exit. And bugs will be correct. So now bugs gives them the option to go to another. To basically have one more choice they have to make before they can get out of the woods. And notice how it's starting to kind of begin to form a pattern. It kind of looks like when we did prime factorization in elementary school, you're working your way down. So now let's say they need some sort of shelter for the night. And so let's say either you take the time to build like a teepee of sticks, or you take the time to make a bed of leaves on the ground. So teepee versus, we'll say, leaves. And let's say that the bed of leaves didn't protect you from like the critty crawlies of the night. So the leaves will be the exit point. And we'll say the teepee gets you through the night. And this will actually also be an exit, but it's you win instead. Because a part of this is you're coming up with the storyline, right? It's not just if statements. You're trying to say like, okay, you're trying to make it kind of feel like a survival situation. So we're gonna say, okay, you win, you made it through the night. Let's say that some people who were camping found you and you find your way back to civilization. So that's us kind of planning out not only how we are going to structure our code, but it's also building out the storyline for a game. So we have a very, very clear plan of attacking once we actually begin coding. So what's been given to you here is the image address to that forest picture so that we can just move right ahead and we don't have to waste time searching for pictures on the internet. So to get this portion to actually display rather than just showing the image address itself here in our box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in img inside of the less than symbol. So I'm going to grab the less than symbol. I'm going to type img. I'm going to grab the greater than symbol. I'm just using that so y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. And then inside of this, we're going to say, okay, so this is our img or our image tag within HTML. It lets HTML know that it's about to display some sort of image. So we are going to write inside of it source, and I'm going to say equals. And so the source is where the image is coming from, and that is what our image address is, right? It needs to know where in the internet it needs to take that image from. And then we are going to write alt, or actually let's just start here and let's hit run and see what happens. So already off the bat we got our forest picture. But to have a little bit more control with how it looks, let's just do a couple other things. So first off, I'm going to say ALT, or alternate, is basically what that's short for. And inside of here is where we are going to write a message that is going to display in case that the image address for a picture is something that HTML doesn't recognize, they can't search on the internet and find. So here I'm going to say we can't see that. This way, if there is something wrong with this image address, for example, say I got rid of a few of the characters, now it's obviously not correct, and it's going to display this alternative message so that we know, oh, it's likely a problem with the image address. It's not a problem with potentially any other code that we might have had written. It's basically an easy way for us to pinpoint where a potential problem might be and to solve it. So I just changed my image address back. This is just good practice, and it's something good to have. Next, we are going to try to manipulate the width and the height of our image a little bit so that we have more control. So I'm going to create width, and I'm going to say equals. Instead of quotations, I'm going to say, let's go with 500. And then same thing with height, equals, instead of quotations, this one I'm going to keep at 250 because I don't want it to be a perfect square. This time when you hit run, it alters the image a little bit. So feel free to take a few minutes, and if you want to mess with the width and height, see how you like it, see how it looks when you shrink this image. It's not going to, when I shrink this window here, it's not going to change my image. It's just going to get smaller or bigger. So that's up to you. I'm going to keep mine at 500 and 250. And then to finish up kind of a little bit of what we've got going here in this box, let's create a little message for the user to read. So inside of that, I'm going to create a paragraph tag by grabbing another less than symbol, typing P greater than. And you'll notice as soon as I do that, it auto-completes the closing tag for me, which is really convenient. Remember, anything that's within these tags is whatever this property is going to apply to. Anything I type underneath here is not going to apply to this paragraph tag. So inside of my opening and closing tags, now HTML knows that it has to display this text. I'm going to say, you are lost in the woods. Make the right decisions and try to get out. So I'm going to hit run, and that displays right underneath. Now a big thing here, order does matter a lot. So if I were to cut this and place it above my image code, my sentence will appear above my image instead. So that's something cool. So I'm going to put it back underneath. And one last thing is I'm going to create a button. That's my start button that helps the user out. So inside of a less than, I'm going to say button, and then I'm going to do the less than, and then there's my button tag. And then here I'm going to say start. This is what's going to appear on top of the button. So now we can see the word start. So we're going to come back to this little button tag in just a second. We're going to go onto our JavaScript portion, write out our function that actually performs all of those decisions and stuff, and then apply it to this button here so that our code knows, okay, when the user clicks on our start button, that is when our function needs to run. So let's actually just write our function header. I'm going to hit enter a few times so that we can see, so that we have a couple extra lines up here, because we're going to fill some lines of code that we're not going to write quite yet. And I'm just going to create my function header. So I'm going to write function so that as JavaScript is reading this, it knows that it's about to enter some sort of set of instructions. I'm going to say start game, and then my open and close parentheses, that is the name of my function. That's how I'm going to recall it in other places when I tell my code to actually run my set of instructions. And then I'm going to do my open curly brace, which, by the way, is located right next to the P, like the letter P on your keyboard. And it will be a curly brace when you hit the shift key and find that hard bracket key. So naturally it's a hard bracket. When you hit shift and hit the same key, it'll be a curly brace. So now I'm going to hit enter a few times so that within our function, any code that's underneath this, for example, in line 10, 11, so on, is not going to be within this set of instructions. So first, let's ask our first question, the one about our water. So to do that, I am going to write a prompt and then an open parenthesis. This is our command that allows our computer to essentially show that window. And anything inside of these quotations that I'm going to place is what is going to be written inside of the prompt. So we place it inside of quotations so that JavaScript knows that we are trying to display text. So here I am going to write, you are dehydrated. There is a river nearby. Do you drink the water straight from the river, or do you take the time to build a fire and use a pot you have to boil it? Type, and then inside of single quotes, I'm going to say drink or boil so that the user knows exactly what we're looking for. And say type drink or boil for your answer. And then semicolon at the end. Good practice. And then what we're going to do to actually, obviously throughout this, super big part of coding is testing out your code as you go little by little. You never really want to write like a huge chunk of code without hitting run in the middle, because if there's a problem and you've written just 100 lines of code, it's going to be really hard to find out where that problem is. But if you've been testing your code all along and line by line, you know exactly what's going on and what works and what doesn't, it makes it a lot easier to pinpoint potential bugs or problems within your code. So say I've missed a curly brace, or maybe even just written this line incorrectly or used the wrong command or anything like that, it's easier for me to pinpoint it earlier rather than later. But to actually run this function, this is where we're going to come back to this button tag, right? Because we said every time to call this function, the user has to click on the start button. So to do that, we are going to go inside a button. I'm going to say on click. And then say equals, and then inside of quotations, I am going to write start game, open and close parentheses, semicolon. And so that is me calling my function that I've written here. We are going to write more inside of this, but we're just testing out what we got so far. So now our code knows that it needs to run this function every time the user clicks on our start button. So now I'm going to hit run so everything updates. And I'm going to click on start, and there is our first window. Now, right now, if I type in anything, nothing's going to happen because we haven't told it to. So what we are going to do is we want to be able to store the user's answer. We want to be able to store whether they type drink or boil, and based off of that, write our next set of commands, right? So in order to store information, the first thing that should be coming to mind is, oh, let's put it inside of a variable. So to create, first off, on line 1, that's why we left that extra room up there, I'm going to type in var and say first decision. So that's just the name of a variable I've created. And then I'm going to, so this right now doesn't equal anything. So here is where I'm going to say first decision equals prompt. So now first decision is going to hold whatever the user types in this case, either drink or boil. So now that we know that this variable is holding those pieces of information, we're going to say, okay, depending on whether first decision is drink or boil, it'll run its own specific command. So underneath, we are going to write a conditional. Remember, conditionals are ways for us to check for specific situations, and if those specific situations are true, as a result, another command will be run. So here I'm going to write if, and let's first check if first decision is equal to boil, if they chose the, in this case, correct answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if first decision, type it exactly as it appears. I'm going to say equals equals. You use 2 equal signs here rather than 1 equals because I'm about to compare first decision to the word boil in all caps. Since I'm comparing 2 pieces of information, I want to have double equals. If I'm trying to set a variable to be equal to another thing, that is why you use 1 singular equals. Super, super important. You don't want to get those mixed up. So inside of your if statements, it's always going to be more than 1 equal sign. So now we have our situation that we're checking for. Let's say, okay, and then inside of curly braces again, here is where we are going to write our next prompt. So our next prompt is going to be, okay, the user chose to purify the water. Now let's figure out how they are going to get some food. So here I'm going to write my prompt line again. And then in here, I am going to say, because of your extra care, you drank the purified water and your health seems okay. Remember, you're building a storyline here. It's a game. So you got to make them feel like they're actually in that survival situation, right? So here we're going to say, okay, they have the option to either eat insects or try to hunt a snake and roast it. And then we're going to say that eating the insects was the right move. By the way, y'all, I'm not a survival expert, so I don't know which one is the better move. Just trying to create a fun game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, but you need to find some food and fast. Do you eat insects you find in a log, or try to kill a snake and roast it over the fire you built? And now we are going to be very specific with what we want the user to type. So I'm going to say type inside of single quotes so they know, again, exactly what we're talking about. Type bugs or snake for your answer. Make sure to only put the word bugs inside of its own single quotes and snake inside of its own single quotes. So you exit out of that. But still have the rest of this in yellow. If this isn't in yellow, that's a problem. So double check that everything's inside of its own quotations. So now I'm going to add a semicolon at the end. And now let's hit run and see what happens. So hit run, start, and I'm going to type in boil because that's what we were checking for so far. And I'm going to hit OK, or you can hit enter, same thing. And now it shows our next page. So we got something going for boil. What I'm going to do real quick is create another variable for second decision because we want to store this information as well, because that's going to obviously affect whether the prompt leads them to the next choice that they have to make to potentially get out. So here I've created second decision, again, another place to store a variable, and I'm going to say second decision equals prompt. So now we got a place to store whether they write bugs or snake. So We've got something for if first decision equals boil, but obviously we still haven't done anything for if it was drink. Now, if they drank the water, we are going to consider that as an exit point. We don't want our function to continue reading. We don't want it reading any other conditionals because at this point they have lost the game. So this is essentially our output point. So I'm going to actually say above above the if statement that we just wrote, I'm going to say if first decision equals drink. Then inside, I am going to say return. Return is the key word that is inside of functions telling them to output. They're not going to, after this return line, it's not going to continue reading it, anything we have underneath. And we know that's okay because first decision is not always going to equal drink. It's only even going to bother reading line 10 if the person inputted drink. If they didn't, it's just going to skip over this line and we don't have to worry about it exiting our function. We know it'll actually continue reading whatever we have placed underneath. So I'm going to tell it to return an alert. An alert is when we still get some sort of window, but they don't have the opportunity to type anything in. They just have to hit OK or cancel. So inside of the alert, I'm going to say you contract a disease from the contaminated water. And better luck next time. So now let's see what happens. Hit run again, hit start, and I'm going to type in drink here inside of my prompt. And there is my alert popping up. So that means first decision's all wrapped up. Let's get on to writing some conditionals for the second decision. So now after my prompt here in second decision, I'm going to hit enter a few times so I got some room. And now let's first check if they chose the wrong answer, if they chose snake. So let's say, okay, if second decision, be really careful of your casing. Again, equals, because you're comparing two things. You're checking if second decision matches the word snake. Let's hit our curly braces. And by the way, I'm indenting the way I am to show what's inside of another thing. So anything that's written inside of an if statement is indented by 1 or 2 spaces so that it makes it a lot easier to read. So as the more and more you're writing stuff inside of each other, make sure you're indenting a couple times. Notice how everything that starts, all of my if statements inside of my function are indented by 1, and everything inside of my if statements is indented by another, and so forth. So back to checking if second decision equals snake. We are going to, once again, return an alert. This should be another potential exit point for our function. They should be done at this point. So we are going to write return, telling it to output a final message, which is where alert comes in. And then let's do our parentheses, and then inside, let's write quotations. And then we are going to say, okay, we're going to say the snake attacks you as you try to hunt it, and it turns out to be poisonous. The venom knocks you out, and you don't make it out of the forest. Once again, trying to build a little bit of a storyline. Okay, so there is our exit point for if they chose snake. And we're going to say, okay, if it's not snake, then the only other option is if the second decision equals bugs. So here what we're going to do is introduce a new kind of conditional. I'm going to write else if. All else is it's basically a way for our code to know, okay, if the first situation we gave them, in this case the first scenario being decision equals snake, if that doesn't end up being true, then our code knows to automatically look underneath into the next conditional that we've placed. It's different from just writing another if statement because an else is an either or situation. It's either this conditional is true and it runs whatever's in here, or it runs whatever we're going to place in here. If we have 2 if statements in a row, it has the potential to run both lines. So it's just us giving our computer an alternative scenario in case the first one isn't true. So here I'm going to write second decision equals, And then obviously if it's not snake, it's going to be bugs. And here is another chance for the user to now make a third and final decision. So here we're going to say it's them creating a way to like stay for the, or it's our user trying to figure out what they're going to do through the night. And we're going to say, okay, they have the opportunity to either build a stick teepee or a leaf bed on the ground. And we're going to say that the teepee was the correct answer. So let's write our prompt inside. I'm going to say, well, those certainly didn't taste great, but you have some food in you, which will help you survive the night. But you need some sort of shelter. Do you build a stick teepee or a leaf bed on the ground? Type, and then inside of single quotes, teepee or bed for your answer. Cool. And then once again, if it's their third decision, got to create another variable to hold it. So var third decision. And then here I'm going to write third decision equals prompt. Cool. So we've set third decision to be equal to that. And last set of conditionals, these are going to actually both be exit points because it's obviously the last decision that they have to create. So these are both going to say return and alert, but obviously the message that we place inside is going to be a little different. So we're going to say, okay, if third decision equals, and then inside of quotations, let's say TP. Let's do curly braces. Let's say return. By the way, I'm just hitting tab once so I can indent like that. It makes my life a lot easier to just hit tab once rather than the space bar a couple times. So I'm going to say return, alert, inside, create some quotations, and let's say, congratulations, you made it through the night and were found by some people who were camping. You survived. And by the semicolon is essentially like you're creating a period at the end of the sentence. You want to put it at the end of any sort of like single standing command. In JavaScript, it's something very common across many coding languages. So it's, even though it's your computer's not going to yell at you if you don't put it there, it is something that is very good practice and that you should do if you're writing in JavaScript. Okay, so let's write our last set of conditional, let's write our last conditional, which is if third decision was not equal to TP and if it was equal to bed. So that's why I'm going to say else if it wasn't the first conditional, it wasn't the first situation I'm checking up here, then it should be whatever I've written inside of here. So let's say if third decision equals bed, curly braces, hit enter, hit tab, and then last but not least, return, alert, inside, we are going to say, sorry, your bed didn't prove safe enough from the wildlife of the forest. You didn't make it through the night. Sorry. And then end with a semicolon. And at this point, we got all of our decisions, we got all of our conditionals written. Let's hit run one last time. And then look at everything, hit start. And I'm just going to keep hitting the right decision so that we get to the end. So here it's going to be boil, hit enter or OK. Here's our next one. I'm going to choose bugs here, and we know that the final answer is TP. And there is our alert that says, congratulations, you made it through and were found by some of the people who were camping. Cool. So that's exactly what we've written. At this point, your adventure game is all done. I totally encourage you to share this with your family and friends. You can copy and paste this link anywhere and send it, and your family members will be able to play the game, and encourage and see if they can survive. And so at this point, you have earned your second Coding for Good badge. Congratulations.